Today we have very two important guests. I would like to welcome Sridhar. He is a very distinguished banker. He has spent roughly almost more than 30-35 years in the banking industry, 20 years with Axis Bank. He was the president of Axis Bank. And then, he, in the last corporate role, he was the president, chief risk officer of Lakshmi Vilas Bank. Now he is an angel investor, works with various angel community, and I thought it will be a great privilege for the young uh, entrepreneurs out there to learn and listen to his advice. So welcome, Sridhar. Uh, Hi, Faraz. So now I have
Yeah,
Faraz. Faraz is one
yeah,
of the co-founders of a Bits Pilani student startup. They are friends who started this very interesting AR VR edtech. Uh, they are trying to change the way the students learn in the schools and colleges. We are quite excited with their product and the initial success which they have got in last 12 to 18 months. We'll talk about more in detail over in the next 20-30 minutes. So welcome for us.
thank you. Thank you, Ankur.
So, Sridhar, let me start with you. Uh, I'm since the time, and since you are one of the advisors also to Hostel Fund, since the time we have started this Hostel Fund, we have received more than 100 odd student pitch decks. And let me tell you that these are not the business plan or the presentation. These are the actual businesses where students are actually working on solving real-time problems. One very important thing which has struck to us that this, what we call these guys, Generation Z. So Generation Z is trying to solve the problems of the Generation Z, uh, which I think most of us have not been able to identify that problem or think from that perspective. Do you think that is that a right approach, or are you also seeing that trend happening in the ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Ankur. I think Generation Z is possibly that far ahead. I think in terms of what we see, my personal view is that uh, a lot of new ideas are coming in. A lot of problems are coming in. These problems were not there earlier. Maybe those problems are coming in because they're new opportunities. I think the use of internet, for example, the use of digital, some of normal now. Given that situation, I think you have completely new coming out of it. Naturally, these problems are to be solved more by this set of new entrepreneurs, the new generation. Having said that, I think maybe the ideas are there, maybe the problems they understand far better than maybe people who belong to the earlier generation. And I'm sure they would also be looking at, solutions in a new manner. Maybe people have not been thinking about those solutions in this manner. Everything is evolving so fast. I think as a result, I think it's a good thing, isn't it? Nice thing. There are a lot of people are coming. The fact remains that young entrepreneurs coming up, that trend is only accentuated over time. Today, what we are seeing, I think it represents a big multiplier over what we would have seen maybe 5 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, great. So for us now, on the
Okay.
on the same lines where Sridhar has basically made a point that it and also talk about your company, what you guys are doing and building. But did you find this problem, or how did you land on this opportunity?
Okay. So the problem, as in the problem that we are trying to solve, or the problem about Gen Z or something. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, the
like,
problem which Alexar is trying to solve.
okay, yeah. So yeah, so we are all BITS Pilani students, and we had practically worked very hard from class 9 to 12. And the biggest thought which was in my mind was that there are lakhs of Indian students who are investing up to 8 to 10 hours, more than that, each day into studies. and the best and afterwards all of that effort is just going waste because they are just forgetting all of the knowledge that they have gained. Now they don't remember anything that they have like spent hours and hours practicing and working on. That was a huge problem which was really close to me, that it is a waste of human labor. So now we can't really blame the students because they're trying to do the best that they can in this entire scenario. So what we could do was make learning in such a particular manner such that it makes them some active self-learner and inculcates a scientific temperament amongst students. So what we thought was the way that the student is learning, it should add on and it should fundamentally change the how the student is looking towards the world and how they are changing as an individual. And it should not be just some additional knowledge or even some additional skills. So that's what our basic aim was. We wanted to make students active self-learners and we wanted to inculcate scientific temperament amongst students. Because if you build this, they would be just continuing that in the further days to come also. Because right now, as you see in the world, learning is a never-ending process. Even when you cut to the corporate world, and after that, you have to constantly innovate yourself and your company. So the biggest point that schools should teach right now is to inculcate the scientific temperament, and they should build the student up from the beginning so that they can tackle the world and modify themselves up in the coming times. That's, I think, so the entire problem statement that we wanted to solve and how we went forward to it. So yeah, and we utilized augmented reality for it. We developed simulations, worked with NCRT. That's a long tail, but perhaps for the next question. But that was the core philosophy of our startup.
And who is in your co-founding team? When did you, launch your startup? Share more details
Okay.
about that for us.
Yeah, so I'll be brutally honest about it. So what happened was that during my first year, I was hell bent on studying. I was studying very hard, got really good CGPAs, etc. So after my first year ended, my senior was like, "Now all you have to do is you have to learn competitive programming, and you can get a package of 30 to 40 lakhs a year." That was like a big thing for me, as in like I was not that was not really a big thing for me because it was that so all like everything that I did with my life, the best I can reach is that much package, which is highly respectable also. But at least I should try to do something big. I can fail about it. I don't know how the world works. There are thousands of people more equipped than me, equipped with more skills, equipped with more money. But at least I should just try to make a dent in the universe per se. So me, Harshit, Sashak, we began in our second year only while we were what 19-year-olds, and we straightforward went to the problem. We didn't spend much time on planning and stuff. We were like, let's start doing and let's start gaining experience. And when we have gained some amount of experience, then let's try to structurize it and understand how to exactly want to take it forward. What should be the exact employee structure, organization structure, all of these things. So for the past 1.5 years, we had been hustling, hustling, hustling. So now what the point has come is then we are structuring the startup, making it more organized and all stuff like that. So that has been the basic course of action that we have followed.
Great. So, Sridhar, I would want your advice and I would want you to share your insights. One point which Faraz mentioned, and that's been my learning also after dealing with so many student startups, that they are very good at ideating, they are very good at identifying the problem. They are, most of them are good hustlers also. Okay. But I think one thing which, uh, uh, two things basically, they have been able to, not able to learn and no fault of them, largely is um that how to sell, how to market, what's the business,
So,
how to get the market access, because this is the first time they are basically going out and selling something. So that's the one point. And second, also the one point which Faraz talked about is largely, I think he, hats off to him that he has been able to think on the entrepreneurial line. But most of us would not be uh, able to consider कि, hey, whether we want to leave a 30-40 lakh package job and try something on our own, which to be honest might not lead to a success in terms of money in the initial years. So, how should young entrepreneurs on both the cases should learn, think, and move forward?
wonderful.
So, I think you're right, Ankur. I don't count you. along with me. Possibly I am a generation ahead of you. The way I look at it is when you look at job as something that will pay you your money versus doing something entrepreneurial, learn something for the mind and for the heart. I think there is a difference. One is just living, the other is enjoying it. Maybe doing something, developing some pride in it. It's a completely different way of looking at both things. And yeah, I think the new education policy talks about looking at something beyond just simple rote learning. Today, our colleges and our systems force people to get into rote learning, but what Faraaz is talking about and his friends are talking about is something else. Having a mindset that is focused on learning throughout the life. You ultimately you will need to learn throughout the life at all stages of life. I think the way I sort of would understand this, the first thing for a young set of people, it is the idea that matters the most. And as we talked right up front, it is the younger generation that's able to think about so many things. And they are, I think, telling us a lot of things. They are coming up with a lot of ideas. So it's great that we hear these ideas from them. And again, from a problem solutions perspective, I think they come up with the ideas. So the instead of ideating, we need to instead of really getting everything right is important. But I think the way we are doing it today, I appreciate it. You are learning on the go. You are hustling. You're somehow trying to move ahead. I think that's important. If you were to ask someone like me, I would sit down with a piece of paper, start putting boxes, get into a diagram and say, okay, you are in this grid, you are in this grid, okay, where are you, how are you moving, and start drawing a chart and all that. I don't think you guys have the patience, and I'm happy you're not training that way. At this stage, what is important is to move ahead with speed because an idea that comes into your head can easily come into another head very quickly. So you might lose your advantage as first mover. So I think it's good to do that. But as you get into the stage where you're going to launch the company, actually start going out, making a product or a service, and actually
Not so much in terms of saying, okay, who is my customer, or not so much as saying whether this product looks great. The issue really is about how you're going to reach the customers, how are you going to get that sales process on so that you are able to really reach out to the customer with the solution, make the sale to the customer. And here in the process of sales is not about saying that I've got the product, I'm going to Amazon and you come to Amazon and take it. Not everything can be sold that way. A lot of products might need a distribution channel. And it might be not just a distribution channel as in a physical channel. For example, in case of beauty products, you've got Hindustan Unilever and others as your competition in a physical distribution channel. And it would be quite tough for you to break through there. But then even if you were to use something else, you might need to work with partners in distribution. So who are those partners going to be? How are you going to sell to those partners? And all that is relevant because you need to have an efficient process in sales. You cannot stock up a lot of stock with the distributors because then your working capital goes for a toss. So amongst the partners, my sense is, amongst the promoter partners, one of them at least has to focus clearly on sales. And you will need to have people at some point in time in the journey, people who have actually done sales, and get them on board and help them with doing things their way while you are there to guide them on what is it that you want to do differently. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that part is important. That is the
yeah.
way I look at it. And
No,
in my experience, I think
Partner.
mostly I find the failure is on the sales side, not so much on the product side, not so much on the technology.
yeah, yeah. You're right. You're right. I think
Wonderful.
you're very right. So for us, I think so. How's the structure in your team?
Hmm.
Because all three of you are engineers in the same from the same college. So who handles what? Like, is there someone who's dedicated for sales? Is there someone who's dedicated for product, tech? How are you trying, or everyone is doing everything?
Um, yeah, of course, like further down the line, we realized that everyone doing everything is not at all the best course of action. And for achieving like maximum efficiency, it's best that we distribute the roles and responsibilities for each other. And that's what happened. So there were three founders, one of which, Sashak, he went totally for development, totally focused towards it. And like the remaining us two, me and Harshit, what happened was that Harshit was still focusing on the designing element and all this skill technical development, but me and Harshit, we became the the frontline frontline workers for the startup, as in for establishing the distribution channels, for establishing connections, for building rapport with the market, and taking it for the establishing a business model on what needs to be done, writing proposals, and all of this particular stuff that was handled by us too. And what Sridhar sir right now mentioned, that it's not just about what you offer, and it's not about whom you are going to offer it to, but rather how you're going to get to them. As in, the toughest part is having the meeting with the stakeholders, having a meeting with the decision maker. That becomes more tougher for the tech startup because the education as a whole is quite inefficient, has been. In comparison to other sectors, it is tougher to get a meeting with a decision maker and make them like get them motivated to try something really new. So I think so that was like spot on observation that the toughest part is how you're going to reach them, and then comes the part of selling the product and all of these things. And yes, sales is way big startups to fail rather than product. That's like spot on. I was like wonder to hear that.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. You're right. As a human being, each one of us gets 100 ideas a day. It doesn't matter. Ultimately the sales and the execution which matters the
Yeah.
most. Uh, uh, Shridhar, one other point, since you meet so many startups, now what has happened is that almost all of them in one domain are trying to solve the same problem and trying to solve the same problem. I'm just taking a liberty to say it the same way, because ultimately the information is so much available across everyone that everyone just with an execution skill has been able to. So you can't just say, hey, I'm the only one who's trying to solve this problem. It will be foolish to say that. It's just that I do not know who else is solving that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
in that way, is only the
Spot
sales
on.
which will matter, or there's something else also which will help the early stage entrepreneurs basically be on a successful path?
Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you raised. Uh, it's a problem that even very large companies grapple with. We all know, within the industry there could be two or three big companies all fighting to get that incremental 1% share.
Yeah.
So it's obviously that golden mantra that everyone is after. Let me tell you from what I see. I think typically we started off by saying that there has to be a team with cohesion. So amongst the promoter team, I think there has to be a singularity when it comes to the final decision. Though you might start off with having different ideas, but eventually when you come to the final decision and a decision taken with inputs from everyone has to be implemented. You cannot question it. So that is the starting point. The second one is, as I look at it, it's a challenge for a sales guy to go and sell a product that's not been built well. And it's a challenge for a product guy to understand what exactly is the customer, what exactly is it that the customer wants. So I think we need to be typically in a consumer company, maybe a Hindustan Unilever, would have a product manager who really operates across what we call as domain about the product, about the making of the product, about what is the market, about the competition, about the distribution, and everything. He becomes responsible in some sense to the top line and the bottom line of it. So if you have a concept like that in the organization, you're going to start off with an idea and figure out what works and lay out a roadmap. I think the important thing again I want to mention here is what is the roadmap for the organization for in the next 2-3 years. You have not reached a size that you want to build a 10-year roadmap. You would have a dream of 10 years, but then your roadmap has to be short term and medium term. Short term तो चाहिए ही चाहिए क्योंकि आपको तो cash का you'll have to take care of your cash. And a medium term to ensure that you are there up ahead. So if you're talking about learning apps, for example, there are lots of people who are in this domain now. There's a huge amount of competition. Everyone who comes in and says, I've got AI, ML, someone says, I've got a very wonderfully made video thing. Someone says it's very interactive, right? Someone says, I will attach it to certain toys. Someone says, I will give it through video games. Someone says it's interactive in a manner that the parent and the children are doing it together. So there are a number of these kind of ideas that is floating around. You don't know what is going to be the final shape of this idea after 5 years. So you need to look at it today in terms of what is it that will sell best, in my opinion. Well, ultimately, you are there for the top line. So you cannot become very conceptual about it and say that my solution is excellent and therefore I'll do more R&D. There's one tech company that I talked to, and these guys, they're working on a solution, and they've been at that 99th% trying to reach the 100%. My point is, boss, in the real world, an IT solution will never give you the 100%. IT companies तो मर जाएंगे अगर पूरा एकदम 100% होगा. How are they going to live after selling? Yeah. They have to earn their money through the regular, upgrades and patches and all that. So that is the reality check. And you also need to constantly look at what is it that the customer segment might want today and how would it be going forward. If you talk of learning apps, today because video in the mobile, now everyone uses mobile so much. 3 साल का बच्चा हो, now the child is a problem, you give him a mobile and you forget about him. Now, if that is the way in which people are working, video is a powerful tool and a mobile might be a powerful delivery platform, right? Now, with that being the case, the question that might come up is, but then a video is also a device to connect to the net, and there might be other things, other apps on the mobile, and parents might be naturally worried about, unforeseen exposure and other such things to the child. So you might want to figure out what is it that you can give to them as security. And then the interactiveness of it all. Is it interactive enough for a child of 3 years and a child of 5 years? And the important thing that you might have to solve for today is the parent, not the child. The parent is 30 years, 35 years, maybe 40 years. The kid is far smarter. So how is it that the parent can cope up with the demand of this app? Because if I give a toy to a child, which is like what it was in the past, a small wooden thing the child would play, you are not worried. But when you talk of an interactive video game or something, or a learning app, the child might need intervention of the parent from time to time. So you need to look at how the parent is able to cope up with the challenge of this. How user-friendly is it to the parent? I would say these are the things that when you examine, you might find that your competition, whether it is a direct competition or an indirect competition, has not addressed a certain angle of it. And that might be the weakness they have, and if you address it, that will become your strength. Yeah. And you need to figure out a journey for your app and for your offering that going forward in the next 2-3 years, you're able to improve it on a particular scale. And if you do that, then I think you are giving a certain sustainability to the customer. In subscription model, as you know, the biggest issue is what is the lifetime value of the customer. Yeah. You need to solve for it.
Yeah. You're right. I think you raised a lot of interesting points, and we can't find answers to all of these in these 30 minutes. The startups will, the companies spend years and years to find the solution to this problem. But Faraz, the couple of points which Sridhar raised, I think, is of interest, largely for other young entrepreneurs to also answer and to learn from your feedback. like Shridhar made one point that the big companies have the processes, they create their plans, roadmaps, and figure out. But I'm not so sure that that kind of a luxury. That's one. The second, that kind of uh, information and knowledge engineering
Okay.
students like yourselves have. So, who are your sources of knowledge? And if you want to check with someone, ke, hey, are we on the right path or not? Are you have advisors? How's the community in your college? So, how do you spend time figuring out what's happening? What's the best thing to achieve and implement?
That's a wonderful question, actually. And see, of course, like there are various people whom we advise with, as in including even our parents, to even actually industry experts and everything. So, like if you belong to a premier institution, IITs or BITS, then you have a tremendous amount of alumni connections who are ready to guide you at every particular step of your life. So we were guided by a varied amount of industry experts. Like there's this BITS alumni, Prashant Palakurti sir. He is situated at US, great guy. So he was always advising us and trying to inculcate more and more market insights into us and all of these aspects. So the biggest source of learning for us is interactions with other people whom we have developed the connection with. Even interacting with you, Ankur, that involves us to gain wider perspective on how to exactly situate ourselves in the market. So that is one point through which we understand the market. And the second is sales. That is when we try to go do the sales. That is when we try to actually take the product to the market and we talk to people into giving up their money in exchange for our product. So that gives us the most amount of insights because then the person is brutally honest with you because like we have come to take their money, right? So they have to be brutally honest with us. So that's a big source of learning that allows us. Okay, so yeah, schools are not able to have the fees right now. Perhaps we should shift the model to something in which we gain the users now, monetize it later, or perhaps we can target directly the students or stuff like that. Stuff like that. So it's the experiences like when you talk to the customers that really changes you up. And the third and the biggest point is that in the end, it falls down into what the founders are thinking when the founders get on a call or on a meet or just meet and think what can be the best course forward. That is the biggest inflection point for early stage startups. And obviously, like we are constantly advised that we should build up roadmaps, we should build up plans on how are we going to execute it. But there are like just too many variables, too many factors, and too much less is in our control. Like in an established company, you have more powers, as in there are employees who would never leave you or would not leave you for years or decades. But in startups, like your employee can just leave, and there's not much that you can do about it. That can change up all the plans. So over a period of time, like plans really become tough to execute, or just they change up really often. But over a period of time, so startups are like children, right? So in the end, in the beginning, they have huge. Then they start to narrow it down. They start to narrow it down. Then the parents, like the elders, they're trying to say, what's your plan forward? And then they think, okay, I don't know, perhaps I want to be that. And after a period of time, they understand that they can be that. It's like an actual human journey. So and the entire journey needs to be completed. And even in the immaturity is also important in the early stages because they help to understand yourself. But the maturity is also important after the maturity is ended. It needs to be a completely perfect balance. Then only you can survive in the market.
I think you made a very, very important point, which I think everyone knows at the back of their mind, but we forget, which is the best advisors, mentors can be your customers, will always be your customers because they are paying you. They will want
Yeah.
110% out of your product, not 100 and not 90%. So I think that's the one
Yeah.
point. So tell me, how has been your journey the day you started and you reached out, you started selling to schools or colleges? And have you seen your product evolve from then to now? And what's been, so far, one of the most intriguing advices or the feedback you have received?
Exactly. So, like we deal directly with schools, Ankur. So, the biggest point that we learned was that do not talk to the HODs, do not talk to the teachers, do not talk to even the principal, talk straight to the the founder of the school. Because at least to that guy, you can just prove that, okay, this is how you can earn money through our product, and this can enable you to gain some reputation of yourselves. So that can be a great addition. And because if you try to like through research purposes prove that something is pedagogically very effective, it's really tough to do that, even though it is actually to do so. Because in the back of the mind, every teacher still thinks that edtech is bad, and that's the fundamental truth. Teachers, they actually just want to go back to the blackboards and they want to teach, and rightly so also. The best of the engineers that India has developed, the best of the people that India has developed, haven't been developed by studying through edtech. They have been developed by studying through blackboards and notebooks and all of these stuff. So it's totally natural and right of them to think in that way. But we have to try and evolve our education system also. So the biggest insights that we get from on we have to sell, perhaps talk to the founder and then crack it. And it's an ever evolving process.
I want to make a point there because you said something very interesting for us. Uh, Maybe what I say is slightly different in its dimension, but the way I look at it in making a sale to someone and making a sale of something that is new is to prove to the person how this is going to add value to what he is doing. And a standard teacher who uses the blackboard, uh, if you tell them that a projector is something that you could use, the first thing that the teacher is going to say is, oh my God, I'll now have to make the presentation. But if the process of
Hmm.
making the presentation itself is a breeze, is easy, and then you say that, it's like how I get used to a new mobile versus how a child who's 10-year-old gets used to a new mobile. If that process is simpler and that process
Yeah.
is fast, a
Yeah.
teacher might actually see what you give as an assistance and as an additional help in becoming more effective. That is from the teacher's angle.
Exactly.
And you are talking
Exactly.
about approaching the founder rather than someone else. That is so true. The problem is you are dealing with the bureaucracy that is there in the education institute. And in
Hmm.
most of the educational institutions, they run on tight budgets. They are operated like, proper dukan, जहाँ पे what the founder says goes, and no one else has any authority beyond the standard chai ka voucher. They can't spend anything more. So it
Exactly.
makes it a faster process and an effective use of your time. But
Exactly.
the solution to the founder's problem is what you are giving when you go and give it to him. It might be, for example, an opportunity to earn more revenue or an opportunity to look more digital, making a campus more digital, is what your solution might be. So it is the way it is described to these people, and what you say is the reality of life.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're
Exactly.
right. As
Yeah.
you were rightly saying, taking this example itself, the same product has to be sold to multiple people in the ecosystem. And this is how we do in our supply chains in the corporates also, because the one who's going to give you money has a different objective, and the one who's going to use it, the
Hmm.
school teachers, and one who's going to learn out of it, students, all of these guys have a different objective. So you have to basically sell to all these stakeholders.
Yeah.
Uh,
Exactly.
Sridhar, one of the last points which I want to take pick your brains on it, and this is for the young entrepreneurs there to learn. Basically, you have been investing, or you have been evaluating so many startups. One of the challenges which we see, and as a hostel fund, uh, most of these guys, the young startups, do not have established business models, do not have a recurring stream of revenues,
Hmm.
which in turn becomes very difficult to define or put a number in terms of a valuation on it. Okay, as a founder, I would want my company to be valued, in millions and the billions. But then as an investor, we will always bring a reality check in the
Yeah.
process. Uh, so, what's the right approach? Or how should we come? Because ultimately, what's going to happen? I believe that's my personal sense that the time taken by the founder to reach to a particular milestone will be elongated. For an investor, it might be a miss of opportunity, but he or she might have hundreds of other opportunities to invest their money. But for a founder, that's the only opportunity which he has got if he is so passionate. So or what, is there any mantra? Is there any process? Is that a number or whatever? You negotiate, you haggle, and finally you say, okay, this is the number.
It's a very tough one that you asked, Ankur. Uh, you've been dealing with this challenge for many years yourself, right?
Yeah.
And the way I look at it possibly is maybe I'm more intensive into the process, talking to a promoter and then telling him that the valuation is too high or something else. I think the important, so there might be a few mantras. The first one I would say is when you approach an investor, you better approach him in a stage of completion. But then a stage of completion might actually mean actual revenue, which is what Ankur was trying to, hint at. When you are very early stage, you don't have a revenue to show. You have only an idea to show, right? What an investor might want, and again, there are investors that are there for each stage of the organization, from an idea stage to an early stage to so on and so forth. So the same investor may not invest in let us say, a company that is already producing revenue, that's already cash positive. He might like to invest at an idea stage. Okay, because this investor prides himself as someone who can understand the value of an idea, right? It's the pride that this investor carries from his background. Most investors are people who say, I want to see a successful company come with a very cheap valuation. And so that is the standard, discussion that happens between investors and the promoters. At any stage that you are in, I think you need to be true to yourself and say what is your stage. There's no point going to an investor and telling him that my idea is very good, my software is all complete, my product is complete, it's going to run like this, and for example, if you are in a service industry with a process involved and you say, my turnaround time is going to be 5 minutes, but you will never realize the 5 minutes time, for example. And then everything with it goes for a toss. So it's correct and good to be completely honest with yourself and put out what is the reality. If the product still needs some working around, if you say that upfront, you're going to get one investor who may not be the one you approached originally, but you will get an investor who's appropriate for that stage. Otherwise, there is this constant pressure on the promoter to produce results. If your product is still not complete, how are you going to sell it? Right? So everything goes for a toss. Your projection of future sales and your discounted cash flow, pura gaya, everything is out of the window. So you need to be sure about it. And if it takes some time, it might be better for you not to go to the formalized angel investing or early stage investing, but actually lean on friends and others and raise some money and reach that stage. The fundamental thing is whether your product is from a market product, the MVP kind of a thing, whether that part of a thing is over. And then when you are approaching the investor and saying, okay, now I'm completely ready, I've started my sales process, I'm seeing the following reactions, and I think this is how I will do. Now that investor would ask you questions about your product being ready. No investor is going to come and actually use your product or go with you when you are making the sale. Some guys might make it, but then go and see how you are pitching and what is the reaction of customer. The general system does not have that kind of time. So you better be sure about that process, and you're now saying that you're ready and you're going to make these sales and achieve a certain revenue. You need to be sure that you will achieve that revenue. And if in that process you still have to make expenses, you better come out of clear. Because ultimately from a cash flow perspective, if you're going to have outflows and then the cash flow is not positive at the end of the period, it's actually negative, it hits your valuation very badly. Right? And so I think these are the few mantras I would use. And then you might also like to look for those investors who could help you weave through the ecosystem. If you are in this school and maybe college kind of a ecosystem, it would be a great idea to get people who can help you navigate through this. They might understand something more about the new education policy, just to take an example, right? They might be a little bit more conversant with how NCERT schools work and things like that. So it might help you from a sales making process. So you're actually able to make some sales. Some of your investors, you must choose that they are influencers, that they can actually influence, let us say, the Kendriya Vidyalaya in Delhi. अगर उस पे influence किया तो you have hundreds of KV schools. You might land 30, 40, 50 of them. You are able to make 1-2 years. Just start, once you begin into it and start your cash register, start tingling, then your job is done.
Great, great. I think you listed down quite a few analogies for a lot of the entrepreneurs from different streams to think over it. Faraz, one last question for you, since you have been part of in investing. How has been the process so far? You are raising funds. What do you think? What you have learned over a process? What are the few things which your fellow student entrepreneurs should definitely do and should definitely not do? What are those learnings which you want to share?
Okay, yeah, of course. So of course, like raising investment, all of that particular process, it's really in learning intensive, as in it's different from the normal startup journey in which we are basically focusing towards the product, or we are focusing on the model, or we are focusing on the sales. So for the first time in investment, you have to create a rational and a number focused pitch for yourself, and a number focused business model, just a representation of startup based on feeling or emotions or anything like that, but on actual true facts for conveying that particular, but for conveying your startup's pitch to the investors. That's like the four most important thing. So it of course allows you to connect with the investor, but the bigger thing it does is that it involves you to think rational, and it involves you to consider some of the blind spots. I call them blind spots. So some of the blind spots that were in your mind, because with the heat of passion and with the heat of this love for the product and love for the startup, you miss some of the points which are true for us. So, but when you're considering for investment, this entire journey, it allows you to. Okay, so we cannot reach 1,000 schools, perhaps we can reach 200 schools if we target these particular school chains. We have connections there, we can utilize it then. So that is entirely a very good learning experience. And other than that, the biggest point, the best point is that you build up connections, even if the valuation was not suitable for both of you. So, but then you build connections in which you can interact with them, and that leads to better outcomes that won't prosper as even just considering investment. So yeah, that is wonderful. These two things are wonderful. The third biggest point about startup raising investment is that the biggest point of a startup should be to build up a product which generates revenues or profits, or adds some value to the stakeholder, because that's the way you will generate revenue. That should be the core aim of a startup. But in the current like in the current ecosystem, there has been a bigger focus on raising up investment rather than actually building products and taking it to the customer. That is creating a very skewed nature of society, because if this continues, the investors would start to trust the startups lesser and lesser, because they would be thinking that the entire thing that the startup is doing is trying to raise up investment. That should not be the thing, because that involves a very toxic nature of ecosystem. So that's the basic point which I need to change, but which the society needs to change. But other than that, it's a wonderful process in which you learn a lot about yourself and the startup.
I'd like
Great,
to
great.
add a point to what Faraz is making. I think it's a very important point that he made. The value of investment that you're raising is obviously linked to the valuation of the company. My own personal sense and the experience that I've gained over the years investing into the companies is the typical promoter says that I am worth X. My sense is, in the initial round at least, promoters should be less bothered about that X. They should be happy with a X minus something. Because if you are unable to deliver that value to the first investor, your subsequent rounds, you have a problem. And remember that you are raising capital over a number of rounds, over a number of years. So the initial lot that you raise is typically not heavy dilution. The first one is actually tiny. So raising it at a lower valuation gives a trust to the investor who's coming in the first round, and the second round investor who comes looks at this and says that the promoter is actually a reasonable guy. And when you make your next pitch and say that now I want a valuation of X multiplied by 2 or X multiplied by 3, you will say that when I put that value of X initially, I achieved it, as you can see. I think
Yeah, but
that is the note of sort of, I would give it as a general advice. There is no formula of how much it should be. There is a market, there are players on both sides. One of the things that we used to say in treasury markets is, you must leave something on the table for the buyer. When you leave something on the table for the buyer, he feels happy. He buys something at X and he sees that the value is X plus something. If it is going to be X later, he doesn't have the pleasure of it.
Yeah. No, very, very important point. Ultimately, because ultimately on the investing part, both investor and the founder, ultimately they are here to make money. So they have to, and the money, more than the money, it's the value which has to be, driven out of the system. And it's a complex because there's no set formula, as you rightly said. It's my number versus your number. So it's just that investors think that they know the number better than the founders, which might not be the right case
Yeah,
always.
yeah.
Might not be the right case always. But on this note, thanks a lot, Sridhar and Faraz. Thanks a lot for your time. I'm sure the young entrepreneurs would take out a lot of learnings and insights from building the product, selling them, and raising the funds. Thanks a lot, guys.
exactly.
Thank you, Ankur.
Thank you, Ankur,
Thanks,
for
Faraz,
organizing
and
this.
good luck to the ecosystem
Thank you,
of
Sridhar.